CMPC Center at 2901 Wilkers Drive, Suite 137, first floor. Order now at 832-667-8376, Little Maria's Cafe.
I was recently asked what it means to be a family lawyer. What is family law? Family law is not just about divorce or custody or child support. Family law is about your life. As a family lawyer, I protect your children, your wealth, your future. I don't do this alone. As your attorney, we work as a team to determine your goals and priorities and provide a strategy in an often complex, painful, and confusing time. Whether it's asset protection through pre- or post-marital agreements or fighting to protect your children, I'm here to help. My team and I bring decades.
Broadcasting live from Houston, from the space city to the world. You are watching NowMedia Television.
Welcome to Community Shield of the Houston Police Department. Thank you so much for watching us, for following us on our social media. We want to salute our friends from Now Media, our friends from Heraldo Media Group, for allowing the material that the Houston Police Department is constantly providing every single week to be airing in their different platforms. We are on Roku TV, we are on Amazon Prime, we're on Apple TV, we are on Pineapple TV. I don't know, all those different medias. We're all over the place. Also in the different markets in Louisiana, all over Texas, Chicago, Florida, and the different places that you guys are watching us. Thank you so much. We're gonna cover some material here that, of course, applies to policing all over the country. Okay, so bear with us, stick around, stay with us. We're gonna do somewhat bilingual programming today, so we're going to be moving a little bit back and forth, but the material is mostly going to be covered in English. So bear with us and share the program. That is one of the most important things that you can do as you accompany us this morning in Community Shield. You have to share the program. You have to let people know. You have to let your friends know. You have to share the material that we are every single week we're trying to provide. Again, we are looking at through the lenses of the police department. And of course, we bring the guests. We see what's going on out there. We see the hot topics, and we bring the guests in so that they can really dive deep into what the subject material we are covering, not only from the police side, but also from the experts. And today we have Mrs. Sonia Corrales. She represents HAWK, which is the Houston Area Women's Center, because we're going to be covering family violence. This is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And of course, this should be something that should be covered all of the time. Domestic abuse, domestic violence is something that's plaguing our country, something that is it's a hot topic, and the numbers just continue to rise. So we have to nip this in the bud, right? So we're also going to have our friends from Crime Stoppers later on in the program. So bear with us and stick around, share the program. Community Shield is on the air. All right, so let's do a little bit of let's cover one of the topics that is on the news right now. We're not a news station, but we do cover some of the things that are hot, and specifically speaking to the gun buyback program that the Houston Police Department, that Harris County is really taking in. And this is one of the reasons why we're doing this. For example, we have a 13-year-old boy that was shot in the abdomen by another teen that it appears to have been an accident. Now these boys were apparently they were playing with a gun. They were kind of shoving each other, trying to take it away. They were trying to do something with this gun, and then it goes off. One of the kids gets hit, and again we have this very tragic situation. Because we have guns that are not secured, we're not being safe with our weapons. For those of us that are owners, we need to secure these weapons. We need to put some lock boxes in our houses. We need to make sure that these guns are not within the reach of children. Don't assume that because the child cannot reach where the gun is at, that something bad is not going to happen. Kids figure out how to move around. Kids figure it out. And ultimately they do reach that gun, and ultimately that gun is loaded and ready to go. Somebody is going to end up being hurt. All right, so we have Mrs. Sonia Corrales here representing the Houston Area Women's Center, and of course she probably can speak a couple of words to something like this, the tragedy that we see in just not handling weapons right, or not being responsible with guns.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting us to the community. I think this is just absolutely wonderful that you do this and you are connecting with the community in this way. I think, one of the things, I'm in the domestic violence and sexual violence field, and we know that the domestic violence and guns is a lethality that is I mean, it's a mixture that equals lethality, right? Sure. So we know that in domestic violence situations, if you have a gun in the house, sure, you're 500 times more likely to die as a result in whenever there's domestic violence. Sure. And so we know that is dangerous when you give people easy access to weapons. They're going to use it particularly in situations where there's domestic violence. Yes, and that is why it's so serious when somebody is involved in domestic abuse, that those guns are removed from those homes. They cannot be around guns. People that get involved in domestic assaults and abuse, it's so critical. Just people get so hot-headed, and they have weapons, and something they just end up using them on their spouses. But thank you so much for being out here. It is National Coffee Day today, so that's why our friends Ashley, she's in charge of a couple of McDonald's in the greater Houston area, in the east side, right? And she invited us out here. She said, why don't you guys come and celebrate National Coffee Day at McDonald's? Yes, McDonald's. We are at the McDonald's on Mercury and I-10, yes. And this is National Coffee Day. So let's drink up some coffee. We got the coffee back over here. We got some panecitos, some sweet bread, all right, that we're going to be diving into as we kind of warm up for this program. Now, so let's talk about domestic abuse, domestic violence. It is Domestic Violence Week, and we do want to bring awareness. One of the least spoken, I guess, elements of domestic abuse is the one where you don't see injuries, the one that's more verbal. Can you speak a little bit into that type of abuse? I get those calls all the time. Yeah, absolutely. I think we get those calls as well, because a lot of times people don't understand and don't always know what domestic violence is, and so it is important to talk about what domestic abuse. Sometimes we refer to it as domestic abuse, sometimes domestic violence. I know police refer to it as family violence. Sure. So it's all kind of the same thing, right? And it does take many forms. It's verbal, it's psychological, it's physical, it's sexual, it's spiritual, it's economic, all of those things. But we know that in particular with verbal abuse or psychological abuse, that because there is no physical signs in those kinds of situations, that a lot of times people don't identify that it might be some kind of domestic violence. And the way we like to talk about it is that if there is some kind of pattern, sure, where somebody is using power and control, sure, to overpower that person or control that person, identifying those controlling behaviors, then that's when we talk about this verbal abuse. Somebody who is
that's demeaning you or putting you down and putting you down in front of others, somebody who doesn't allow you to make your own decisions.
Sure.
You know, even when it comes to school or work, those kinds of things, somebody who keeps your money, you know, when you go to work, or somebody doesn't allow you to go to work, or begins to isolate you from friends or family, all of that has an impact on you emotionally. And a lot of times people don't recognize that because there is no physical violence,
Sure.
that, oh, wait a minute, that might not be domestic abuse.
Sure. Could that be one of the first elements in a relationship that's about to begin to go downhill? The isolation part, the let me corner you, let me show you that no one cares about you, or that no one should be butting into our business.
I think, one of the important things to think about when we think about domestic violence is that it doesn't start out,
Sure.
as violence, or even like initially the put downs, because in all relationships it all starts pretty positive, right? And remember, it's a pattern of behaviors, and it's a cycle,
Yes.
of violence. And it could start with I don't want you to be with your friends or family, or I get really jealous, or and sometimes jealousy is seen as jealousy is a sign of love, or it's a sign, he really cares about me. But one of the things that we always talk about is that it's not healthy. Jealousy is not healthy in a relationship, and therefore it could be potentially dangerous, right? And it can escalate, and so that can lead to more isolation, because if they start out by saying that they're jealous,
Sure.
and then, you shouldn't go out with your friends anymore, or you shouldn't call, and so that the isolation then begins, and that person begins to just feel isolated. We call it like the abuser tool belt, right? Isolation, battering, all other kinds of tools that they use to control and to overpower this person.
It's about control. So a person that has been violent, a person that begins to be violent, does this mean that it's all of a sudden triggered? Like it's just all of a sudden happened that the person becomes violent, or is there signs that we should be paying attention to when we begin maybe the dating part of the relationship that are maybe flashing at us?
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent question, because so violence is learned, right? We know, and violence can be unlearned. So we know that people can actually change if they wanted to, but that is the responsibility of that person who is conducting that behavior. So one of the first things that we say is that if you are a victim, or if you're a survivor in a situation, either teen dating violence or dating violence or domestic violence, that it is not your fault, even though that person is making you feel that somehow it is your fault. But one of the earlier signs that somebody can look for is, pet abuse. How do they treat animals, or how do they treat their own pets? How do they treat your pet if you have one? That sometimes is a sign, that maybe that person is engaging in violent behavior. The controlling piece of maybe telling you that you're not allowed to wear certain things, don't wear that because you just look too good, and I don't want anybody else to see you because you're mine, or whatever.
Sure.
Those are the kinds of things that you can look for in relationships, and also the decision making, right? Not allowing you to make those decisions that you're allowed to make.
Sure. Now, right now we're focusing mostly on what the suspect, right? The element of the suspect. I've arrived to scenes, and I'm speaking to the complainant. Usually, most of the time, it's the female that's being abused. There are males that also get abused. Let me just say that there are, and I've had cases where it very seldom, but they do come up to you and say, "Officer, I'm extremely embarrassed. I don't want to admit this. It's hard. You have to kind of pull it out." For the men. For the women, is a little bit more. Once they open up, they speak to you. But when I finish doing my talk or listening to the complainant, and I go to the scene and I speak to my suspect, the suspect of they can speak, and sometimes they sound like politicians. I mean, they sound like they are the cream of the crop, and the best of the best. And it's not me, officer. I'm great. I try to keep this house sustained, and everything is perfect. She blows things up. I don't do anything here. And sometimes, I mean, it's like, wow, you get convinced, and the person's all beat up and bruised and everything. And is this something that the abusers tend to master? You used a term when we spoke last time, and it was like,
or manipulation. Yeah. So when one person is is doing this on a daily basis, they're probably pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, survivors are afraid to talk to anybody or to even talk to police, call police, talk to a friend or family because they're afraid that they're going to be blamed for it, because the abuser is somebody who is pretty much a master at this, right? It's somehow making that victim or that survivor feel that somehow it's their fault. It's their behavior that is causing them to behave in the way that they're behaving. If you just stopped triggering me, or if you just stopped doing this, then I would not get triggered and get so mad that I would have to hit you. So it's those kinds of things that I think we have to look for. And people refer to it as gaslighting, and that is something that is that happens in relationships. That scenario that you just talked about with police, that happens a lot, and that is one of the reasons that many survivors don't call police. Right?
Yes.
Is that they think that they're not going to be believed, or somehow he's so good at convincing people of things that they're not gonna believe her. They're gonna believe him. He's not gonna get arrested, and then she has to go back into that house to endure further abuse.
And we see that quite often. They do become masters. The abusers do become masters of convincing. They know the lingo and they do use it. Is this something that as officers we should be looking for? Looking at and sort of be searching for this?
So I will tell you absolutely. I think one of the great things about the Houston Police Department is that you all have specialized training. Right?
Sure.
You do have specialized training. You also have a domestic abuse response team, where that team of officers is trained, more so than other officers, right? Is trained to specifically look for those kinds of signs, because it's not always what it appears when you go out to the scene. So we also know, we talk about the neurobiology of trauma, and that is when you go to a scene, whether it's a sexual assault or a domestic violence, the behavior of that victim being able to recognize what trauma looks like. Because a lot of times if that victim is not saying anything, or is quiet, or really looks like they have no affect, that sometimes it could be interpreted as, well, maybe nothing happened, or it's all fine, right?
Sure.
And so it's understanding all of those things about victims' behavior whenever they're been victimized by their partner or by someone else.
Sure, and I usually use a rule of thumb, and I go out and investigate these scenes, these family violence scenes. When it's family violence, I always use this as a rule, because I like to dig and dig and dig, to say that if that's the first time the person called the police, then there's got to be more abuse. There's more history to this. So that's when I go into the neighbors. That's when I go into sometimes the kids, right? And I ask, and I try to find any other situations where there's been more abuse. Sometimes the victim has video or photos in their phones of previous assaults and abuses that, by the time a victim calls the police for help, it's because this has been going on for some time. And I know this by experience. I grew up in a home that was full of violence and lots of family violence. And by the time my mother made the outcry, we had already seen this. We were already tired of it. It was kind of, again, it's happening again.
Yeah, I think that's such an important such an important point about when that victim or survivor is calling the police. Remember that one of the things that is that we know about domestic violence is that it's very underreported, right? So people don't call the police anyway, or even ask for help, because of that dynamic that we're talking about.
Sure.
That pattern of abuse and that isolation and all of those things that are included in that. So a lot of times they don't reach out. By the time they're reaching out, that is a cry for help. And that's when we have to pay attention as community, no matter who you are, whether you're police, whether you're me, whether you're the neighbor, whether you're whoever you are, really pay attention, because then that survivor and that victim really needs help. And the most dangerous time is when that person is trying to leave. And I think that that's important, because that's when people get killed. Because remember, if we're talking about power and control, then that person has lost that control and that power over that victim. Now they've left.
Yes.
And if they know where they are, then it's more likely that they're going to get killed. And we know that it's 3.5 more times likely that you're going to get killed if you were trying to leave and the batterer knows, or that abuser knows.
So important. We even as officers, even with all the training we have received, and just part of the humanity aspect of this, we always in the back of our minds is, why are you still in this situation? Why are you still living with this person? Why have you not left? And this is one of the big facts that when the victim decides to make a move, that's the most volatile situation. That's when the suspect's about to lose that control. And then what happens here? The victim says, I'm going to call the Houston. Sometimes they don't even call us, but they just call directly the Houston Area Women's Center. What happens when that phone call comes into the center?
Yeah, so one thing that we want to make sure that happens with friends and family is that when somebody is trying to leave, and I just want to go back to your point, is that when somebody's trying to leave, that it is the most dangerous time, and so it is important to support that person because there are barriers in understanding as to why not ask, why aren't you trying to leave? And that puts that onus on that survivor when it's not their fault, right?
Sure.
So how do we support? And I'll talk about how we support, and then how each and one of us in our community has a role to play, because this is a community problem. It's not just mine or yours. It's everybody's issue. So when they call the Houston Area Women's Center, one of the things that we do is we talk to that survivor. A lot of times it's just really talking through what they've been through. And a lot of times it's a lot of that emotional abuse by the time they're calling us. There's been physical abuse and other types of abuse. And then helping them recognize, the things that are going on in the relationship and those patterns. And a lot of times they're like, oh, I didn't know that was abuse, the economic abuse, the spiritual abuse, those kinds of things. So we safety plan with them. And the safety plan is very personalized. There is a safety plan on our website, www.hawc.org, and people can just kind of look through it, but that safety plan is very personalized. The other thing that we do is we do a lethality assessment, because a lot of times they don't know the risk that they could potentially be in of potentially dying. If there is a gun in the house, if there has been previous strangulation, that's a big
huge
sign that that it could lead to homicide.
Yes.
If the violence has increased in severity in the last year, those are the kinds of questions that we will ask somebody, and then it helps them understand what kind of risk they are in.
Oh.
And so then we connect them to either, if they want to go to shelter, they can go to shelter, and we'll do that process at our residential campus. We have wraparound services. It's not just a bed. It's providing counseling. It's for the children, enrichment. We have a school there. So we really are taking care of that family, and then give them access to any other resources that they may need, like police, for example, if they want to continue with that, with that report. We facilitate that process and help them and support them through that. And then we have a non-residential program, because if somebody calls our hotline, but they're not wanting to go to shelter, they really are just needing some support, then we will connect them through our counseling. And a lot of times, it just takes time for them to get to a place where they want to leave, or maybe they've left and they're just working through their trauma.
The Houston Area Women's Center has become, for us in the Houston Police Department, such a great resource. They taught us this 14 years ago when I was in the academy, right? And you just never know how important of a resource they are. And for us to be able to offer this plethora of services and just be there with them as they're calling the Houston Area Women's Center to get what is next. We're going to do the investigation part. The Houston Area Women's Center does all the empathy, all the loving, all of the emotional, all the care, and we need it so much. As in the Houston Police Department, we also have a unit called the DART. It's a division. It's a group of officers that have been assigned to actually respond to these domestic abuse cases, and they bring these social services, the social work, right there on the spot to the victim where the incident just occurred. And again, the Houston Area Women's Center is one of our most biggest or hugest resource that is used, and they are just great for us. As we continue with Community Shield with the Houston Police Department, we are celebrating National Coffee Day at McDonald's. Yes, our friend Ashley, Mr. Guadalupe, one of the managers, is always opening the doors and saying, come out to McDonald's and just do one of the programs from our facilities. We'll have coffee, we'll have bread, we'll have all kinds of goodies for everybody that comes by and just says hi. So McDonald's on Mercury and I-10 here in the city of Houston, on the east side of Houston, and we visit multiple McDonald's in the area. So thank you so much for McDonald's for the love that you guys bring us every time. Now, we have spoken about the abuse that you don't see the emotional abuse, the verbal abuse. Let's go into the financial abuse. What is this? What is financial abuse?
So financial abuse is one of the biggest things. Y
Sure.
gracias, ¿verdad? Por preguntar.
Sí, sí, sí.
The financial abuse is something that we see all of the time.
Sure.
Las personas se quedan
Sí.
en una relación de violencia doméstica porque piensan que quizás no, porque no tienen dinero, no tienen trabajo,
Yeah.
no van a poder sostener a las familias cuando se vayan, right? So
Sure.
it's very hard for them to be able to leave. So a lot of times that's the number one reason people stay. And then when they leave, that's the number one reason they go back. So it's important for organizations like ours and our partners in the community to be able to provide resources around economic empowerment for survivors so that they can move forward. We provide housing, we provide training, we work with our community partners. Here recently, we worked with Commissioner Garcia and
Sure.
HCC to be able to provide those opportunities, for people. Pero otra cosa también es de
Sí.
que cuando una persona te dice, es que no quiero que vayas a la escuela, es que no quiero que vayas a ese trabajo. Entonces, ese también es abuso económico porque no te está dejando salir adelante con tu carrera. Porque te quiere tener allí controlada.
Controlada. Sí, sí, sí. Y lo hemos visto mucho, el abuso económico. También podríamos decir que abuso económico es la persona que dice, mi esposo no me va a dejar ir no me puedo mover porque dependo 100% de él, no tengo otra manera, y me lo ha dicho él, si yo me voy, te vas, te largas y ya no te
Sí.
quiero volver a ver jamás y no te voy a ayudar con nada.
Sí, claro que sí. Y
Yeah.
lo otro también que pasa es de que
Sure.
cuando la persona no tiene documentos,
Yes.
muchas las veces no le está ayudando para arreglar los documentos. Entonces esa es otra manera de controlarla. Y al no arreglarle los documentos, quiere decir que nunca va a tener permiso para trabajar. Y va a ser más difícil para que esa persona salga adelante para trabajar. O una persona que simplemente la persona le dice, toma este dinerito, $20 toda la semana y ve y compra comida. $20 no les alcanza. Nosotros hemos oído historias de una persona que les da $5 por semana.
Oh,
o sea,
wow.
que es un
Yeah.
abuso económico donde está controlando a esa persona.
You keep them as low as you can. You keep them
Yes.
as wow. She was speaking into some people that are in matrimonies or fixing their documentation, and all of a sudden, the spouse says, "I'm not going to continue with this. I'm not going to continue to help you. So if you dare to leave me or to say something, then all that's done and over with." And this is why the Houston Area Women's Center is there to offer that help. Financial abuse, something very common.
Very
It happens
common,
a
and
lot,
it's
yeah.
the number one reason people go back and the number one reason people stay. And so that's why it's important for that financial empowerment to be present.
Digital abuse. There's digital abuse. Is that
Yes.
Facebook? Is that Instagram? Is that?
That is all of it.
Yeah.
It is all of it. That is something that we hear so much,
Okay.
and in our organizations like ours, historically, because I've been around for 30 years, and we have historically just really worked towards keeping people safe, right, and keeping all of that out. When digitally, it's so that we can gain access to things, right? So
Sure.
we're trying to do the opposite. So for us, that's very important because people can be tracked, right? They can be tracked
Yes.
from their telephone. They can be tracked. Just recently, we saw somebody who had one of those little devices.
A little tracker, a little GPS device.
Yes, a little. It was a little. It was in a child's property or something like
Yeah.
that. When we and so the person found them, right? And so it's important for us to talk and educate people on how they can turn their devices off. We've also seen devices in cars, and so we work with local mechanics to be able to identify, where those are. But I think most importantly is teaching and giving information about how you can use your phone in a safe way, or how can you use your iPad, your computer, because they will find you.
They will track you.
Yes.
If he wants to find you, he'll track you.
Yes.
Now, the most popular one, of course, physical abuse.
Yes.
When we get physical, I've always said, when somebody crosses the line and they put hands on you, it's very, very. They've broken a boundary that is completely out, and it's very hard to get that person back. Once they've not only done the emotional abuse, they've talked you down, they made you feel this little worthless, that you're not worth anything, don't make a report, nobody cares about you. But then all of a sudden, hands go up and they start beating you.
Yes. So physical abuse is something obviously that we see as well. And I think that when people are calling the police or reaching out to the police, sometimes it's because that there's some kind of physical incident that occurred, but we also know that it's occurred before, right?
Sure.
But one of the things that we know about physical violence is that it escalates. So as you indicated, maybe it could start with a hair pulling or a shoving or hitting the wall or something like that, but then it begins to escalate. And as that cycle of abuse continues, that violence just gets a little more severe. During the pandemic, when all of those ingredients were there for domestic violence to occur, we saw a severity in physical abuse, like increase.
Sure.
And so we saw people calling us more often as they were calling the police more often.
Yes.
Because there was a lot more physical abuse that was happening in domestic violence situations. You had all the right ingredients, right? You had people at home, people not going to work, and people were already in domestic violence situations, so that escalated those situations.
Mm-hmm. And again, we're here bringing awareness, domestic violence abuse month, the entire month of October, and we want this to take it to November, December. When do you guys see an increase in domestic abuse calls? I know that the pandemic was one of those times that calls went down for a moment, but then everything blew up because now they're at home, they're not going anywhere, tensions are extremely high, but at the same time, some people were so afraid to call the police. So it really went both ways.
Absolutely. I think we see domestic violence obviously year round. There are certain situations where we see it a little bit more. Sometimes when we're just talking about it, like
Sure.
this could spark people calling our hotline more because people now know about it. I think I told you before that when people are coming to us and it's a survivor coming to us, most of the time they're telling us, "I never even knew you existed." So these kinds of awareness programs really help people get information about what services are available. So the message here is help is available. We are here for you. Both the police and organizations like ours, we're a nonprofit. So that sort of sparks sometimes an increase in calls, and that is good because that means that people are getting to know. There's also things like that we know that are patterns, right? So maybe after a holiday, we see sort of like that increase. In the summertime, we see an increase in the number of calls related to domestic violence. I know in Houston, overall, I think we've seen an increase in homicides for sure, or a percentage of domestic violence.
And something that it's really hard when you speak to a domestic abuse victim, and all they want is for it to stop and for the person to change. Two things: stop. I love that person, but I just want it to change. And unfortunately, abuse is when you're an abusive person, it's learned, like we mentioned before. It takes time for it to build inside, and for it to be extracted, to extract that mentality, it takes a while, and it takes psychological intervention. It takes a lot of help that the other person has to submit themselves to.
Absolutely. We are in the business, Houston Area Women's Center is in the business of helping survivors address their trauma, get to a safe place, immediate safety, and then more long-term safety, because we want families to be safe because we know that this impacts children,
Sure.
right? And we're trying to stop that cycle. But you can't stop the cycle without holding offenders accountable or holding the people who are actually causing harm, to the person. And there is help. There is help for those people who are willing to change and make those changes in their lives. Aid to Victims of Domestic Abuse actually has a program, a batterer intervention and prevention program, that you can go to voluntarily if you want to create those changes.
Yes.
Because we can't do, if that person does not change, we can continue to take people out of situations, but we have to change that behavior. And it does take all of us to do that. That behavior and that person who is causing the harm has to do with themselves. But as a society, we also have to change attitudes and beliefs about what we think about domestic violence. And so oftentimes, people think that, well, it's the woman's fault. Why doesn't she just get out of there?
Yeah.
She has the opportunity. But a lot of times, as you mentioned, there's barriers to that, right? So we have to change that. And and I always say that it is a community problem, because it is. A lot of times, we think, well, it's just in the family and it's a family issue, but it isn't. Like you going and talking to the neighbors or talking to other people, we all have a role to play, because typically domestic violence survivors don't go to you first, and they don't often come to us. They go to friends, they go to family, or you notice it, right? And just the prevalence alone, if 1 out of every 2 people are in domestic violence situations, that means that you probably know somebody or know of some, know somebody who knows somebody who is in a domestic violence situation.
So there it is. Even though if you're not a victim yourself of domestic abuse, you have a duty. If you see something, say something about, call the police for that person. Especially you live in an apartment complex, you hear somebody getting hurt on the other side, you hear the screams, you hear the help, don't wait. Call the police. Let the police get there, sort it out. You don't have to show your face outside. Just call the police, let the police show up and see what we can find out of that situation. If you know a sister, a brother, a cousin, somebody that's going through this, guide them. If they don't want to make the police report, guide them to the Houston Area Women's Center so they can get the help that they need. These numbers are just like staggering. I pulled out from the stats from 2021. The hotline that's available receives over 150 calls a day, 54,000 calls. Amazing. The emergency shelter, 1,238 women and children and families this shelter is helping. 163 adults and children are placed in long-term housing. So there is long-term help. All you got to do is reach out. Counseling, advocacy. Imagine this. Advocacy, over 5,100 women and men and children are receiving counseling and advocacy services. Again, the Houston Area Women's Center is engaging so many people all the time. Over 350 registered volunteers that are working to help. 23,000 social media followers. And of course, you guys are making a huge impact in the community.
Yeah, and we can't do that alone. As you mentioned, it does take all of the partners. It takes police, it takes the community, and I think for the community, as you mentioned, that we all have a role to play. It's really simple. It's 3 R's. Being able to recognize. So if you recognize that something is happening, or you think that something might be happening, how do you respond to that individual? And it's simply like, listen, I want you to be safe, and it seems like you're not in a safe situation. How can I support you? Without blaming them. Oh, you need to leave right now.
Yeah.
Get your bags and let's pack.
Or judge them. No.
So you can't do that. So being able, and then lastly, as you mentioned, connecting, right? Referring. So that's the last R, is referring to an organization like HAWK or like other organizations in the community, the Bridge, Bay Area Turning Point, ABDA. I mean, there's other organizations too that help with this issue. And again, I think that when we look at domestic violence domestic violence victims who have been killed, we know that they've at least contacted somebody or somebody new. And so how can we help intervene in those situations?
And we hear I didn't know it was that bad.
Yes.
Yes. It can't be. So just if you can empower somebody to call the Houston Area Women's Center that's going through this abuse, let them get some resources, get some help, that would be awesome. Señorita, where do we contact the Houston Area Women's Center?
So we have our hotline that's 24 hours a day, 713-528-6798. No, that's not it. That's our business number.
Oh, okay, all right.
713-528-2121. 713-528-2121. And then we also have a website that you can hit a chat button. So www.hawc.org, and you can hit the chat, and then you can talk to somebody with our chat.
Find the HAWK. HAWK. Houston Area Women's Center. They're out there to help you. Outreach. Give them a call. 713-528-2121. 713-528-2121. Stick around. Don't go anywhere. This is Community Shield of the Houston Police Department. Today we are celebrating coffee, National Coffee Day, and we are doing it at McDonald's on I-10 and Mercury. Yes, we have been invited by our friend Ashley and also by our friend Mr. Guadalupe to celebrate today by coming out here, bringing Community Shield and doing this broadcast on the McDonald's on I-10 and Mercury, I-10 and Mercury. If you guys want to stop by, say hi to the crew over here, and just they're beautiful people that are always just working so hard and just taking care of everybody over here. How you doing? ¿Cómo están? ¿Inglés, español? ¿Cuál de los dos? Español. Mire, hoy celebramos el Día del Café y por eso tenemos cafecito gratis acá también por si quieres rellenar el vaso, y el panecito acá, ya lo miro que está bien. Venga para acá, venga. ¿Está bien empanizado usted ya? So he's got his bread, right? He's got his sweet bread and coffee over here. So as we see people over here, they're picking up their bread. ¿Cómo está? Venga para acá, jefe, venga. Venga rapidito, venga. Venga para saludarlo. No corra. ¿Cómo están ustedes? Buenos días. Good morning. ¿Ya agarra café usted? You don't drink any coffee? All right. All right. ¿Cómo se llama? What is your name, sir?
Pablo Anguiano.
Pablo Anguiano. You're celebrating National Coffee Day today?
Yeah.
All right. You got your coffee already?
Good.
I like your Chicoche glasses.
Gracias.
All right, thank you so much, man. El vino, he came by and he said hi. Jesse.
Yes.
I like it. Man, that's awesome. So, si quieres, si gusta agarrar panecito, es gratis, ¿ok? Panecito y el cafecito. No hay ningún problema. Los que están llegando también pueden pasar. All right, so we're going to continue. We have our friend, la señorita Sydney. She represents Crime Stoppers. So we're going to go on with this segment. Let's set ourselves up as we continue speaking about domestic abuse, Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and Domestic Violence Awareness Year. All right, we'll be right back. Community Shield from McDonald's on Mercury and I-10.
All right, so we continue here. We are in Community Shield of the Houston Police Department. And, well, I want to say hello to all my friends. I want to say hello to everybody that's watching right now. I am like the expert in domestic abuse and family violence. I get thrown around the house. I don't know why. I know I'm made out of cloth and I don't know, but I have my friend here, Mrs. Sucker, and she works with the Crime Stoppers, and she says she's gonna hire me one day to go work with her.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How are you?
Now.
Yeah. Now.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm about 40 years on the department here.
It's okay.
All right. I'll go with you. Okay, so I'm gonna sit down over here, drink my coffee on National Coffee Day, and I'm gonna listen to you speak.
Good.
Yes, Poli Chicho. All right, we continue with Community Shield of the Houston Police Department today. It's all about domestic violence, domestic abuse. It is the month to recognize that, and we should do this every single day. Recognize and always participate in somebody's life if they're being abused. Help them out, inspire them to call for help. We just spoke to the Houston Area Women's Center, and we spoke about the empathy, taking care of a person, loving them and all of that. But now let's speak about the police. Mm-hmm. You know, the work that police have to do, the numbers that we'd see out there of people that are getting abused. Señorita, how are you doing? Welcome.
I'm good. Thank you for having me, and thanks for talking about this subject. I think it's one, as you said, that needs a lot of attention. I think that although it's National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, this is something that we should be talking about year-round. So
absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Now, you guys inspired the program, all right?
Yeah.
I love the press conference you guys had some time back, and you're bringing awareness to this. I was like, we need to again do this and say it again, right? Tell us a little bit about the Crime Stoppers and what you do in Crime Stoppers and how you guys affect and work with family violence and these situations.
So I'd like to start with just talking about our Day of Unity. The first Monday in October is considered Day of Unity across the nation, and that means that people are supposed to come together and really begin the National Domestic Violence Awareness
Sure.
Month. So we hosted a press conference in which we highlighted 5 of thousands and thousands of domestic violence fugitives. And we had a partner fair where people across our city came together and showed what their resources are and their specific organization to serve victims and survivors of domestic violence. And then we hosted a seminar that talked about safety planning. We can talk about safety planning a little bit. But really, one of our biggest initiatives this year, our newest initiatives this year, is the launch of our Glenda Gordy Research Center, which tracks crime trends and data in a form that is easily digestible to the public. So through that, and honestly with the help of you guys and the Sheriff's Office, we've been able to track better family violence charges and homicides that are domestic violence related. So we've seen, in 2021, we saw a 50% increase. There was 81 domestic violence homicides last year, and there's 51 so far this year. So we'll see what our year turns out to be. And really over the pandemic, we saw such an increase of calls to people like Houston Area Women's Center, who we're so grateful that they're around and taking action, but also in domestic violence related cases. We saw about a 14% increase last year. I am happy to report that our aggravated assault of a family member charges are down 18% this year, so that's good. Although I don't know.
Yeah, you really don't know if
Yeah, because
people stop reporting.
people stop
something
reporting.
happened,
Also, our really violent crime like homicide, domestic violence, homicides have increased so much
Sure.
that I tend to worry. Are we seeing less aggravated assault and more homicide? So. Anytime you're looking at numbers and statistics, you have to think of all the contributing factors that are there. And so when we're looking at domestic violence related homicides, I always think of our law enforcement partners, because some of the most dangerous situations for you all to go into are domestic violence situations, some of the most dangerous calls you answer. And it's hard when we have so many fugitives that are domestic violence related.
As a law enforcement partner, you guys are so essential in putting all these numbers, the data together, making something out of this data for us to see and to tackle. You guys do so much education. You guys are experts in education, and you guys have just people that are educated in every single possible aspect of abuse, violence, of crime.
Exactly.
So tell us more about this workshop that you guys had, this event that you guys had. What did you see? Was it expectations were met?
Definitely. It turned out to be a very good working workshop, which we maybe weren't expecting so much, but some of the most dangerous times for domestic violence survivors, the leaving process. And so we felt it was really necessary to help educate not only anyone that could potentially be in a domestic violence situation, but also the everyday community member on how to help create a safety plan. Because this is everyone's effort. I mean, us, moms, dads, sisters, co-workers need to be aware of the signs of domestic violence and be able to aid in creating a safety plan. So a safety plan is something that's put together to help kind of mitigate potential severe violence and help keep that survivor or that victim from getting incredibly hurt or losing their life to their
I know before they try to make that escape or before they try to make that run out of the house, you should be preparing.
Yes, definitely.
What is this preparation kit that people should be preparing?
So there are lots of things to consider. Things like, what important documents do you need, and are they stored somewhere that you can have access to them? Things like your birth certificates and insurance, and do you have a separate bank account? Can someone be holding money for you somewhere else so that when you leave you have access to that? You want to think of any children or pets in the home, and will you have to leave them behind, or can you take them with you? There's a really big initiative that actually Purina, the pet brand, has put together over the past several years to raise money for shelters to be able to be equipped with the resources to not only house people but also their pets, because one of the biggest reasons that people don't leave is because they can't take their pet with them, and not very many shelters, I think less than 10%, have the ability to care for pets. So that's a really big, it's called the Purple Leash Project. You want to consider any potential weapons that are in the home, and where are they, how can you avoid them, and where will you go? So a lot of these things I think of from a community perspective. How can we help? Likely, if someone is in a severe domestic violence situation, they cannot just be looking up this information on their phone or just transferring money to a new bank account. They need some help doing that. So that's where a coworker could come in, or a friend could come in and say, hey, when you're here at work, please use my phone. A victim's phone very likely is being monitored by their perpetrator. And so simply having a friend or a coworker to help you look up information or help you plan for things or help buy some gift cards for you to set aside
gift cards,
is really important. So that's what our workshop was this past Monday, actually. And we have a very brief kind of card on our website, crime-stoppers.org, that gives you some things to consider, a lot of the things that I'm saying right now. But I also really want to direct you to Hawk's website. Hawk has a really wonderful resource that walks step by step and even is interactive for you to fill out to create a safety plan.
What is usually a perpetrator, a person that is victimizing an individual? What do they do after the victim makes that outcry and runs out of that house? Is that the most dangerous part? And what do you guys see the numbers look in in murders. And,
It's definitely the most dangerous time. They're angry. A perpetrator is most interested in control. So when you take that control away, we see a lot of violence. We see, homicides, aggravated assaults, and it's important to remember that often I think victims feel safe when they have a protective order, but that protective order is only as good as and honest as that person who that protective order is against.
Yes.
So if they're, already willing to break the law, then likely
they're willing to break the protective order if that's what they want to do. Let's talk about these protective orders. You call the police, we go out there, we find the data, we find the evidence that there has been an assault. There's charges against the individual, the person's taken to jail. The protective orders, how does this protective order work? How do they work? How do they get enacted?
So basically, is a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper that says, hey, you should not engage with the victim. And I think we think that there's a lot more substance to that than there is. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't get one, because it is better than not having one for sure. But also, we've seen a more than double increase in violation of protective orders in the past 2 years. So our protective orders, again, are only as good as and honest as the people who they're against.
And these protective orders, they are usually enacted when the person is brought in front of the magistrate,
Yes.
right? And the magistrate tells the suspect, you may not call the victim, you may not call their family, you may not be in search of this person, you may not use somebody else to be communicating with this person.
Stalking this person, that kind of thing.
You may not visit the schools where the kids are at, you may not approach in any way, shape, or form this individual. And if you do, then you're basically telling us we're gonna go get you and arrest you again once we find the evidence that this is happening. But phone calls is something that
We see a lot.
yeah, and the victim calling the suspect.
And that's hard. Phone calls, text messages, social media communications, even things like stalking through watching your stories or following you on Snapchat. You have to remember that a lot of our social media platforms have location services. And perpetrators use that to stalk. There's actually a new service on Snapchat. There's a version of Snapchat called Snapchat Premium. Snapchat Premium you can pay for, and a lot of people are interested in doing so. It gives you a lot more features. But it allows you to track someone's entire location for 24 hours straight, exactly where they are and exactly where they're going. So that provides a perpetrator, a suspect, a lot of insight into where someone is, what they're doing, and it's something that you might not think about being used. You're not thinking so much about how your digital footprint is being tracked and how that could be used to find you in real life. You're thinking, are they showing up at my house? Are they calling me? Are they contacting my family, showing up at my kids' school? But things like tracking through the online space is quite dangerous.
These documents, these protective orders are only effective as you calling us and letting us know that the suspect is making phone calls to you. The suspect is reaching out to your parents, trying to contact the kids at school. Let the school know also that that there is a protective order and
in place.
He cannot be coming by. And then, in a way, I mean, you have to cooperate also with law enforcement after this protective order is enacted, because that's the only way they're going to be able to stretch that protective order to last a little bit longer.
Right.
Now, for someone to get to go to jail, necessarily you don't have to do much of cooperation if the evidence is already there.
Right.
Because the state will go after you. How does this work when the state becomes the complainant versus the complainant themselves? The state takes over these cases?
So what happens is that, I mean, if there is a suspect in the case, law enforcement, once that protective order is violated, is going to look for that individual. The problem is that you guys are working so hard. You guys are working so hard, and there's so many violations. And so, say that person has fled the state, that's even more difficult to find them. Say that person is now using an alias, that's even more difficult to find them. So I think that once it is taken over by the state, you're going to do everything you can to find that person. But again, sometimes that requires some help and some assistance from the victim, which is also so traumatizing. Victims are fearful for their life. They might even still really care or really love that person, and that's hard to fight as well. There's a lot of emotions in these kinds of traumatic situations, which is also why it's important as a community to be empathetic and to remain a support and a listening ear, even if you don't understand why they're still contacting or you don't understand why they're still communicating with the perpetrator.
This is something that happens, and we know, all of us know someone that's going through a situation where there's violence. Again, motivate them, inspire them to call for help. The Houston Area Women's Center, inspire them to call the police when the situation gets bad. Kids, they receive the worst end of all of this, that psychological abuse of seeing their mother or father getting beat up by that person that they consider their hero.
Yeah, and the web of crimes when it comes to abuse is so broad. I mean, we see child abuse in this, we see sexual assault or human trafficking, we see long-term damage to people, and even generational abuse where it's a learned behavior, and maybe either that child then, when they're ready to be in a relationship, thinks that this is okay behavior, or even treats someone in an abusive manner because that's what they've learned in their household. So this is something that we have to work together to really combat. We have to educate, and I'm so grateful for our school team that goes into schools all day and every day and talks about things like this. They talk about teen dating violence and human trafficking and child abuse and all kinds of things that are affecting our children.
That's right.
So maybe someone is saying, hey, that's actually not healthy behavior, and how can we help you with understanding what is? So I'm thankful for that.
Yes, and this is something that Crime Stoppers, they are our experts at. They go out and they teach about this. They bring awareness in the most unexpected locations. So if you are a leader of a community group, you lead maybe a church, and you want to invite Crime Stoppers maybe to come by and do a talk about a certain subject, how do they reach out to you guys?
So you can email us at scp@crime-stoppers.org, or you can go to our website, crime-stoppers.org, and there is a form that you can fill out a presentation request. We have 22 different topics that we talk about for adults, and I believe 13 for students. We work very closely to ensure that we are covering any and every topic that the community needs education on, has wanted education on. We're asked a lot by churches to come and talk about domestic violence, a lot by community centers, even businesses at this point. We go to a lot of corporations, so anywhere that we're invited, we're happy to go. I really encourage something like our safety planning conversation that we had on Monday, because it's just a good thing for every single person to be aware of, whether you will need a safety plan someday in your life or someone, one of your friends or family members needs help creating one. It's good knowledge for everybody to have.
That's right.
I also would love to talk about reporting anonymously through our tip line, because domestic violence in particular is something that is often occurring in someone's life that is very close to us. And maybe we are afraid of or don't want to speak up out of fear of retaliation to us, on our family, and our home. And so I think that our anonymous reporting system that's tried and true is a really incredible way to get someone the help that they need without having to link your name to that investigation.
You guys have mastered that. You guys know, you guys have it all down about reporting anonymously.
We do. So you can always call and report. Like I said, we've highlighted 5 fugitives on Monday, but there are thousands. I mean, thousands and thousands of domestic violence fugitives. So if you ever have information or you suspect that there's domestic violence in your neighbor's home, your coworker's home, please call. You can call us at 713-222-TIPS. You can download our mobile app in over 20 languages, or you can report anonymously on our website, crime-stoppers.org.
There it is, and that is so essential, that you are able to make that report, be anonymous about it. People don't like to be, digging into other people's business, and that's okay. But one thing is not digging into their business and being there. And another thing is just not making that phone call to an anonymous tip line that's going to provide them the services that they need. Of course, police would go out there and do our investigation.
Absolutely.
We're not just going to go in there and no, we do our investigation. We have to investigate the situation, but you would provide us with the necessary tools just at least to go and do a knock and talk, right?
Even if you just suspect, even if you don't know, if you have some helpful information, call. It's better to report and there be nothing than to not speak up and something really tragic happen.
You hear those stories on TV, on the news. I didn't know all that was going on there. I heard a little noise. I heard the arguments. I heard I saw the person cry, but I didn't know it was that bad. So again, call this line if you know of anybody that's getting abused, if you've seen anything, but you don't want to get directly involved, you want to be anonymous, at 713-222-TIPS. That's Crime Stoppers, an amazing tool for police. It's anonymous, 713-222-TIPS, 713-222-TIPS. Thank you, Señorita Sydney, for being here with us.